I want to say a special good morning to everyone that's here. Thank you guys for coming. If this is your first time with us today, thank you for spending it with us this morning. I know it's a time investment, and so we appreciate you taking the time out and joining us here at Epic this morning. I'd also like to say a special hello to everybody that's watching by Periscope. Could we put our hands together and say good morning to everybody that's watching right now? And also, this past week was kind of a milestone for us. We got the messages now not just captured through video, but have been edited and put up on the site. So if you ever miss a Sunday, you can go on epicbaltimore.com and pull it up and catch up with the series. So we're super excited about that. If you're watching this later in the week, hopefully the Ravens win later today, and you're feeling good about it. 2005, we started as a church. 10 years ago. It's a decade. It's crazy. I was looking at a video myself this past week, and there's so much gray hair on my face, on my head. It's just nuts. And I was thinking, man, we started the church 10 years ago, and the very first guest that came into our church was this awesome couple. They were from Denver, and we were in another hotel at the time, way down in Harbor East is what it's called now. And so I invited them out to lunch, and so it was them two and myself, and they invited me to go out to sushi. And we were sitting down at sushi at this cool place in Fells Point, and we were talking about life. I'm trying to get to know them, and I realized that I was kind of on the stand. They were trying to get to know me, see if I was, out of my mind or not, see if I was sane and this church was going to be a cult or just a normal group of people. And so, they're posing questions to me and asking me this and that and all this stuff. And then we got in the middle of our meal, in between my salmon roll, they asked me these questions about what I believe. And they posed it like this. It was kind of a question that you really can't say a particular answer to. They said, hey, you guys don't really believe that everything that happened in Genesis was like literal, right? You guys don't believe that, do you? So I reached down for another salmon roll and I shove it in my mouth. And then the other one, chimed in like, yeah, you don't believe that like Jonah was really swallowed by a whale, do you? And I reached out for another salmon roll and shoved it in my mouth. And I thought, wow, I didn't know there was another way to read that, My church background was kind of like a fundamental view, and so what the Bible said was what it meant, and we just kind of went from there. I was never posed with that level of doubt in my adult life. Today we are wrapping up a series called Confessions, where we've been talking about the things that many people are thinking, but very few people are actually saying. Last week we talked about the confession, I don't like most Christians. And we talked about the reason why lots of Christians get some dislike, and we had the staircase of religion. Anybody remember this from last week? And there's kind of a staircase that we as Christians go on, and it's not intentional, and it's not really all that biblical either, but we do it because we want to get God on our side. And what happens on this top level, I don't want to re-preach it to you, but on the top level of this staircase of religion is where you become this pseudo-martyr. Like we think we're so holy that the world hates us because we look so much like Jesus. And true to form, Cupgate was this past week. The Starbucks cup thing, did anybody see that? Unless you live under a rock, you saw this Starbucks thing. And so it was this guy who's a former pastor somewhere and said that Starbucks hates Jesus because they took a Christmas tree off the Starbucks cup. And so the whole world just exploded over this red cup. And the funny thing was in there, he said, Starbucks hates Jesus and hates us too because we're so much Jesus. And I was like, that's the fourth step right there, He's doing it. He's preaching my message better than I could myself. And so we talked about that's the reason why a lot of people look at Christians and just kind of go, y'all crazy, And so anyway, we talked about that last week. Today we're going to wrap up our series with the last confession. I have doubts. Doubts are an interesting thing to have, an interesting phenomenon actually, especially in this environment where it's built around a relationship, and relationships are founded on trust and faith and believing the best about someone. But in this environment, there's so much to doubt, right? In this idea of Christianity and a relationship with God, there's so much to doubt. Things like, can the Bible be trusted? There's a lot of areas to doubt in there. Like, did the flood really happen? Or was that just a story? Did Jonah really get swallowed by a whale? Because all science tells me that there was no way that could really have happened. There's so many places to doubt when you open up the scriptures. How about this? How can we resolve the tension between suffering in our world and a loving God? Has it ever caused you to step back and say, man, what's the deal? I kind of have some doubts and reservations. Just a few days ago, Paris was ravaged by terrorists. Hundreds of innocent people were killed, not just in Paris, but there was bombings in Lebanon the same day. In Kenya, someone walked into a school and shot and killed 100, I think it was 147 people died the same day around our world. Have you ever stepped back and thought, hold on, if God's really all that loving, why doesn't he stop all of this terror and bad things that are happening in our world? And maybe if you haven't thought it, I know you've heard that question before. How about this? Maybe you were drugged to an Easter service one Sunday in your life, and you go, and the pastor's up there, and everybody's doing their best, and maybe the choir's in their choir robes, and they got their choir thing on, and you're like, Easter is Easter, and the pastor gets up and retells the story where a guy dies and comes back to life on his own 3 days later, and you thought, hold up. That doesn't sound possible. Maybe we're at the place where doubt started to creep in some of those areas. There's so many things to doubt when it comes into this environment with a God that we can't see and a set of scriptures that were written by tons of authors over a long period of time. There's a lot of places where we can step back and have doubt. Many of us view doubt and faith as two polar opposites. That these two things cannot coexist. That where there's the presence of doubt, there's the absence of faith. We believe that these are our two options. You either believe or you doubt, and that is it. What if I told you that these two are not mutually exclusive? That faith and doubt could coexist in the same place? What if I told you these two things were not always on two separate ends of the spectrum? There's a lawyer who was turned Christian writer. His name's Lee Strobel. He wrote a book called Case for Christ, where as a lawyer, he put Jesus on the proverbial stand and attacked Jesus and everything claimed about him as a lawyer would. And lawyers, all they do is they poke doubt in the story, and they want to find a way that someone can step back and say, I don't know if it's 100% true. And he did this as a lawyer, and it's actually how he came to faith, as he started to try to poke holes with all the doubt that he had in his life as a non-believer. And he came up with, man, it really is a true story. Jesus really is who he said he is. And he writes this book called Case for Christ. And in it, he talks about this thing of doubt, this elephant in the room of doubt. And there's a couple things that I want to point out to you from this book before we jump into our text. And a few particular things. Number one, he says this: doubt is not the opposite of faith. Unbelief is. So there's faith and belief, there's doubt in the middle, and there's disbelief on the other end. It's not polar opposites. Doubt lies somewhere in the middle of faith and unbelief. The Gospel of John says that unbelief is really the chiefest of all sins. It's really the thing that is the heaviest. Second thing Lee Strobel says, he says, doubt is not a sin to be forgiven. Unbelief is really the sin. A lot of times doubt kind of sits inside and it becomes almost a place of shame. Like, I don't know if I really believe all this consciously. I don't know if my logical mind, my rational mind can believe these things. And so we feel some sort of shame or distance. Like, I'm not really a real Christian because I still doubt some of these things. And he points out that doubt really isn't a sin to be forgiven at all. Unbelief is the sin. And we'll see in just a moment how those two things end up resolving. Third thing that he mentions, he says, doubt is not a disease. It's rather like an inoculation. Did anybody get a flu shot this season? Anybody get one of those? When you go get a flu shot, they take a small piece of the flu virus that is current and they inject it into your body. Your body fights that flu virus and comes up with an immunity to that strain of the virus. And so when someone walks by you and goes all in your face, and flu just sprays everywhere. If you're a hypochondriac, you know what I'm talking about. Like, you can almost feel it. Like, oh. When flu kind of comes your way in the air, your body already has built up a resistance to it. And Lee Strobel says that doubt is kind of like that inoculation. When there's a little bit of doubt that comes in your mind and you have a healthy process to go through these ideas of doubt, that when real doubt, real catastrophe comes into your life, that you have a healthy process in place. There's almost an immunity of sorts to this doubt. Fourth thing that he says is doubt can protect. Doubt is not always a bad thing. He says it can actually protect you from error. Maybe when bad theology is being taught and people are taking scriptures and twisting them inadvertently and it's being taught wrong, or maybe gullibility. How many bad cults or how many cults throughout history could have been stopped with someone saying, hold up, I don't know if the Hale-Bopp comet is really coming for me. Like, can I opt out of the purple Nikes and the Kool-Aid? Like, is there a way? Because I don't really think that you're telling the truth here. A healthy doubt can actually protect us from some things that can be hurtful. Strobel points out that the word doubt it comes from a word that means two. It's being of two minds. To believe something is to be of one mind about that thing. To disbelieve something is to be about one mind of rejecting that thing. Doubt is of two minds, being in the center. I don't know if I truly believe or I truly disbelieve yet. I'm somewhere in the center. It's of two minds. Doubt comes from a place that means being of two. One of the most famous doubters in Scripture is this guy that has the name Doubt tattooed to his name, Doubting Thomas in the New Testament. He's the most famous doubter. It has to be in the New Testament. Interestingly, the name Thomas in Aramaic or Didymus in Greek is how he was known. Both of those names mean twin. He was one of two. Isn't it funny, doubt being one of two and Thomas being in between? He's identified as being one of two. It's almost his identity to be a doubter, to be someone in the center. I don't know if I believe it. I don't know if I disbelieve it. I'm just going to stand here in the middle until I can prove my case. Thomas received this nickname during a series of incidents with Jesus post-resurrection, and Jesus comes back to life, and Thomas has his doubts about the whole thing. And if you've ever doubted the resurrection of Jesus and thought, this is impossible, it really can't happen, you're not the first. Thomas has claim to that, and he was very public about it. He didn't hang on to it himself. He would probably be an angry blogger in today's day and age, like, nah, this ain't true, let me tell you why, and this was Thomas's, his thing. And I want to take you to it, John chapter 20 in your New Testament. If you got your Bible, grab it and turn there with me. There's some Bibles, I believe, on either end of the room, and they'll be on the screen for you also. John chapter 20, starting at verse 24. I'll give you a little background. Jesus had just been murdered by capital punishment. He was accused, he was found guilty, and he was taken to a cross, and he was killed on what we would have as an electric chair or lethal injection, except it was brutal by the Romans. He was hung on this cross. 3 days and nights pass, and they are dark and they are lonely, and these 11 disciples which are left, they're in hiding because they fear that the authorities are going to come and find them also. And so the first Easter morning, Jesus appears. John says Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene first, a woman in that culture really had no credibility. And so Mary Magdalene runs back and tells everyone else what had happened, and not everyone believes what's going on. Well, that Easter night, Sunday evening, Jesus appears again, all ghost-like. Like the doors are locked, and Jesus just pops up. I don't know if he had a Batman smoke bomb or whatever it was, but he just like, pow, ha! What if he did that, Wouldn't that be great? I picture him as kind of like, oh, what if he was like, ha! Anyway, we digress. Let's jump in. Verse 24 is where we pick up the story in 20th chapter of John. He says, now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. He was out somewhere else, wandering the streets, doing whatever Thomas did. So verse 25. So the disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. Now, listen to the way this story plays out. When the disciples were in the room and Jesus appears to them one day, Thomas wasn't there. And I think it's interesting that Thomas wasn't in the room, that he wasn't present. Thomas believed that the world in which he lived was one without a risen Jesus. His world, in his mind, in his heart, was one where Jesus was dead, and that was it. That was the end of the story. And so he was out living his life as if Jesus wasn't coming back. He wasn't waiting for a risen Savior. He wasn't waiting for Jesus to come back, and that's exactly what he found. He found what he was looking for. And we do the same, right? We always find what we are looking for. If you're looking for errors in Scripture, you will find them. If you look for crooked places where things don't make sense, you're going to find it. If you're looking for a godless world, you will find things to support that belief. If you're looking for reasons to discredit God, discredit church and Christians and faith and all of that, you will find them. But conversely, when you're looking for God to show up, you will find that. When you're looking for a risen Christ in your life and a place for him to provide for you, you will find it. Thomas found a world without Jesus in it. The time where Jesus pops up and appears and shows himself to his disciples, Thomas was off somewhere else because he wasn't looking for that. He was looking for somewhere else. They run and tell Thomas, Jesus showed up, and he thought it was a story, a tale, a fabrication. He thought it was completely unbelievable. He wasn't even on the side of doubt. He said, it's not true. I do not believe what you're saying. And so then he comes back into the center and he says, well, unless, let me respond this way. Let's read on. Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. Can I just point out, and this is a sidebar, this is very brutal and vulgar of him to say. Like, unless I want to stick my hand into the side where his flesh was split open, then I'll believe it. I want to bore my finger into the holes in his hands, then maybe. If I could see the scars with my eyes, almost sacrilegiously, blasphemously, unless I see that for myself and touch it and feel the flesh with my own hands, then you can forget it. I'm not going to believe it. Thomas's doubt was outspoken, was plain. There was no question where he stood on the subject. If I don't see it, if I don't touch it, if I can't prove it myself, I won't believe it. But I love Jesus' response to Thomas's doubt. Let's read on verse 26. A week later, so a whole nother week passes by, the disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them, and the doors were locked. And though they were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." A painter that I really love is this guy named Caravaggio. And he was from just past the Renaissance era. He painted this picture called The Incredulity of Thomas, or the stubborn doubt of Thomas. And this painting as a whole is amazing. But I was reading some critiques of the painting itself, and I wanted to point out a few things to you just with some close-ups. The first close-up I wanted to show you is of Thomas's expression. The Renaissance era was all about stills. It was the moment that happened. But this Baroque era was about experiencing it as if they were experiencing it too. And so he paints this expression of Thomas at the moment he's touching Christ. And look at his brow is just awe, amazement. He's blown away by Jesus actually being there, but also that his openness to it, his surprise, there's self-disgust, there's shame, there's all of this emotion that's found right in his face. One critique pointed out Caravaggio's painting of Thomas's hands. I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but Thomas's hands are extremely dirty. There's dirt under his fingernails. He has a torn appearance. You can see his jacket's torn off. Thomas is dirty. And in contrast, Jesus is pure. He's white. There's no dirt on him at all. He's clean. Thomas's doubt is coupled by his imperfection and his dirtiness and all of that humanity that comes with him. Another one pointed out Thomas grabbing his own side as he's touching Jesus' side at the same time. His doubt gives way to his own wound. Though he may not have been pierced on the cross as Christ was, Caravaggio is trying to show him that he realized that Christ took his cross for him, and that was his wound that he experienced at the moment he was touching Jesus. There's so much depth in it. Second thing I want to show you in this painting is Christ's reaction and Jesus' invitation that's happening here. Notice that it's Jesus' gentle hand that's inserting Thomas's finger into his open wound. See his hand grabbing Thomas's there? This is an invitation to come and touch. He's almost like gently drawing Thomas in. Caravaggio, an incredulous man himself, still saw Jesus as a gentle inviter, an inviter of doubt and stubbornness and skepticism, an inviter of reservation. Bring it all with you. Jesus didn't turn his nose up to Thomas's doubt. He didn't stand and wait for Thomas to get it together. He didn't stay hidden until Thomas had made up his mind. He reappeared to Thomas specifically. He showed himself just to Thomas because he wanted to invite him, and he invited him to come and touch. He invited him to investigate. He invited his skepticism. Can you imagine a friend that you walked with every single day for 3 years straight? He's turned on by one in the inner circle. He's arrested, publicly tried, and he's humiliated, stripped down bare, made to carry this cross. It's the most embarrassing thing that you can imagine someone going through. And he's a friend of yours being mocked and spit on, and his beard being ripped out, and he goes and hangs on this cross, and he's brutally murdered right in front of you. Can you imagine just the horror of that weight in your heart? Now that friend is standing in front of you, alive. You imagine all the things going through your mind. How? When did this happen? Did you really, you really died. I was there, I saw it, and I heard John, he was standing, he saw you take your last breath, and how did all this happen? Where did you come from? How? I don't get it, I don't understand this. And he was so public about his doubt and his suspicion and his unbelief about all this stuff. There's no way. Well, you know what? If you can prove it to me, then maybe. And Jesus shows up and invites him to touch, to doubt, his skepticism. His gentle hand invites you to touch his wounds for yourself. Jesus isn't shaken in this scenario. He's not shaken by Thomas's doubt. He isn't insecure about Thomas's suspicion. He's confident. He's assured in who he is. There's nothing to hide for Jesus. He knows who he is. Thomas gives an ultimatum. Unless I can see it for myself, touch it for myself, if I can put my hand in his side, unless all that happens, I won't end up on this side of belief. Place a decision. I won't act unless I get proof. Unless I resolve this doubt, I'm not going to be one that believes. Doubt itself is not a sin. It isn't wrong in and of itself. It can sometimes help. It can pull you into doing nothing, because that's where error comes in. Instead of choosing to believe or choosing not to believe, doubt will paralyze us in the center of both to where we do nothing. Jesus' actions to Thomas were, you need to do something. Come, touch me, see me, find out for yourself. But don't be paralyzed to where you're there all by yourself. Anybody remember the 2000 Ravens team? Any Ravens fans in here? Let me just make sure you guys are still on the wagon. I know we're dragging bottom right now. But we got rings. It's cool. Anyway, 2000 Ravens team was the best defense in history. Hands down. We got the records to prove it. These guys were amazing. This isn't from the 2000 season, but this is when Bart Scott almost drove Ben Roethlisberger about 4 yards into the ground, like under the ground. It was a beautiful moment. Anyway, I got to get back to my sermon. I was just glorified in that moment. The 2000 defense was the best defense in the history of the game, and they were so good that right before the opposing team would call a play, they were moving all over the place. Some of you guys remember, and it was almost like a hive of bees. They were just swarming around. And usually you have a defense, and these guys put their hand in the ground, and they're about to attack. They would have got nobody's hand in the ground. They were all just standing there staring, and the other team had no clue who was coming at them. It was so confusing. And unless you were a genius quarterback at the time, which was like Peyton Manning, I think he was the only guy there, every other quarterback had no clue what was about to happen. And all of these guys could have devoured this quarterback. Guys standing back there, probably $160. All he's done is thrown a football his whole life. And you got all these angry men staring at you, wanting to kill you. And you don't know which one's coming, you know? And so they're back there and they think they got the right play called and they start to see people move and they're trying to adjust. And no, blue 42. Well, no, 42 is not, blue 77. And yeah, we're going to do that one instead. And sometimes they were so confused, the time would run out. Boo, delay a game. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what's going on anymore, you know? And we got to do that again. And they would move back and it would be even more chaotic, you know? And things would go crazy. The defense was so good that it would cause doubt in the mind of the quarterback. And sometimes they would call a different play and they would throw an interception, or they have to take a timeout, or they would get this delay of game. The doubt would paralyze the other team. The defense was so strong and so dangerous and so violent looking that it would cause this doubt to paralyze them and they would do nothing. This is what spiritual doubt does to us also. It's okay to process it. It's okay to try to readjust because you don't want that guy to take your head off, you know? It's okay to kind of step back and say, hold on, maybe I need to rethink this. Doubt is okay. But the downside of doubt is it will disable you, it will paralyze you into acting in no way. It'll pull you back into a place where you can do nothing. Jesus' command to Thomas was, no, don't sit on the sidelines. I'm coming back and I'm talking to you directly. And what I'm telling you is I want you to see this for yourself. Reach out. Put your hand into my side. Don't let doubt paralyze you. You have to act. You have to move. You have to step out. You have to keep moving. How do we keep doubt from disabling us as we wrap up our time this morning? Action. We have to keep moving. Everything Jesus told him was action words. Place your hand here. Look and see. Reach out. Put yourself in the right position. Believe. Maybe this morning you're in a place of decision. Maybe there's lots of doubt that's rolling through your mind. There's confusion. There's some things you don't really know which way you stand on, and the jury's kind of still out. Maybe I'll pose the question to you this way. Is there a place you need to position yourself to? Maybe through an act of obedience, maybe you need to put yourself in the right position to see Christ as he is. Maybe you would say to yourself, hey, I'm going to keep doing the right thing, and whatever happens, happens. Or, hey, you know what? I'm going to tell the truth no matter what, and whatever happens after that is God's responsibility. I know I just need to keep doing the right thing. I need to be kind of obedient in this, and God will take care of the rest. I'm going to keep paying my tithes like I know that I probably should do, and the rest is God's responsibility. He's going to take care of that. I'm going to say no to this invitation because I know it's not the right place for me to be. I need to put myself in the right position. If I lose the friendship over it, then so be it. That's got to be God's responsibility. I need to put myself in the right place, the right position, so that I'll finally see Jesus as he is. Sometimes we own the responsibility of putting ourselves in the right position for God to show himself to us through obedience and blessing. Maybe the question is this: is doubt causing you to fix your eyes on the wrong things? Doubt is okay, but when it paralyzes us in one position, we start to find support for the things that we are doubting, and we get our eyes on the wrong things, and we fix our gaze on these issues or these problems. Is there something that you need to get your gaze off of? Is there something you need to be focusing your eyes on rather than the ideas? Maybe this is the question we should pose to you. Maybe it's what you're reaching for. We find what we are looking for. If we're looking for God to be judgmental and hateful and come down with wrath because we think that's the type of God he is, then we're going to find supporting evidence for that. I mean, it's how life is. We'll find it. If that's what you're reaching for, eventually you're going to find evidence to support that. But Jesus is inviting you to touch him, the gentle, wounded, risen Savior. He's inviting you to touch him with all of your doubt and skepticism and suspicions. He wants you to reach for him, because when we do, we will find him as he is. Perfect, beautiful, loving God. Ultimately, he wants us to believe, to be on this side, to trust and have faith and to see him for who he is, beautiful and joyful and full of life. And Jesus is confident in himself. I love Caravaggio's depiction of Jesus. He's confident in who he is because he knows. He's not unsure. He knows he's the greatest joy that humanity will ever and can ever know and experience. And there's no doubt in his mind about who he is, no questioning, no second guessing of himself. Beyond all this, he wants us to know him. So he says to Thomas, he says to us, stop doubting. Act. Believe. Get yourself out of that middle ground where you're paused, paralyzed, disabled in that one place. Don't let doubt disable you into doing nothing. So my challenge this morning to you is to act. Do something. It's okay if you land on this side and you disbelieve. I mean, my heart would be that you would find out who Christ is and land on this side. But I think what the enemy has done to most of us is he's tricked us into thinking that if we have doubt at all, that God is done with us, that he's cast us aside. Oh, God will never like you anymore because you've kind of questioned some things. The enemy has a way of boring this into our minds and causing shame. And Jesus, he never said that. He's like, well, bring your doubt. Bring it with you. I'm cool. I don't doubt myself. I don't think you will. When you touch me, when you experience me, you'll know what life is about. Would you consider yourself stuck today, holding the ball of indecision, not knowing where to place it? Act. Do something. Reach out. Step out. Look on him. Fix your gaze on this person of Jesus. Position yourself in the right place, and you will see him and find him. Read on. As we close today, verse 28, Thomas said after this interaction, he said, my Lord, my God. Skip down to verse 30. Jesus performed many other signs. This is John's commentary. He performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which aren't recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, that when we move from doubt to this place, by believing, you may have life in his name. Doubt doesn't keep you from Jesus, but we must let it lead us to him. And when we get there, we experience this beautiful four-letter word here, life in his name. Life is the thing that Jesus came to bring, and bring it generously. John 10:10 said he came to bring it abundantly, generously. There's so much of life that he was just making it rain life on humanity. He's giving it out to everybody. John said, man, just by believing, you're going to have life in his name. Thomas found it, and when he did, Jesus became something different to Thomas. Not a deity, not a God of gods, not a religious figure, not a religion. He became his own. Became personally his when he said, it's my God, my Lord. Jesus wants the same for you and for me today. We get you guys to take a posture of prayer this morning. We're going to wrap up praying together. First off, this morning, I'd like to address anyone in this room that may not know Christ as your own. He may be a distant figure to you, a religious figure, maybe part of a religion. Maybe in this room today, and you thought your doubts and your skepticism sort of kept God at a distance, that there was some disapproval on God's part because you had doubt. I believe he's actually closer to you than you can imagine this morning. Calling, inviting, drawing, welcoming you to reach for him, to touch him, to look upon him, to find life in him. All your doubt, dirt, and disbelief, bring it. So this morning, we're going to pray together in just a moment. Everyone in the room, we're going to pray. But today, if you don't know him personally and you want to reach for him. And you say, well, Pastor Chris, I got doubts. I still haven't figured all these things out. That's okay. Bring him with you. He wants to walk with you. He wants to live this life with you. All your doubts, all your suspicions.